Crossing the threshold of the massive mahogany door felt less like an entrance, and more like the commencement of a high-stakes psychological experiment, one where I was both the subject and the principal investigator. The air shifted, becoming thick with the scent of old money, lemon polish, and unspoken judgment. Patricia Whitmore stood before me, a monument to curated perfection, and her face performed a fascinating, awful contortion. It was neither a true smile nor a full grimace, but a bizarre hybrid, as if she had simultaneously attempted to welcome a guest and swallow a particularly bitter pill. Her gaze was a physical thing, a laser-guided inventory system that swept from the crown of my head to the tips of my modest flats. I could practically see the calculations flickering behind her ice-blue eyes, the cost of my simple navy dress, chain store on sale, the humble leather of my shoes, practical, not designer, the petite faux pearl studs in my ears, a pharmacy purchase. The mental abacus completed its tally, and the verdict was rendered in the slight, dismissive downturn of her lips. Worthless. She leaned into my fiancé, Marcus, her whisper a venomous thread meant to be concealed by the cavernous foyer's formality. She looks like the help, darling, the sort who's wandered in through the service entrance by mistake. Every syllable, crisp and cruel, reached my ears with perfect clarity. A strange calm settled over me, a scientist's focus. The hypothesis was forming. This dinner would not be a simple meet-the-parents ordeal. It would be an ethnographic study in prejudice, a dissection of character under the guise of a social ritual, and I was uniquely prepared to conduct it. My name is Ella Graham. I am 32 years old, and for the past 14 months, I have been living a deliberate, meticulously constructed fiction. The secret I kept from Marcus, the man who slipped a diamond ring on my finger, was not a trivial one, not a hidden love for trashy television or a childhood stuffed animal tucked beneath my pillow. It was a secret of seismic proportions, one that concerned the very foundation of identity and perception. I earn $37,000 a month. That figure, a stark testament to lines of code and architectural logic, exists before taxes. After the government's share, it remains a sum that prompts financial advisors to lean forward, adjust their glasses, and politely request confirmation. I am a senior software architect at a Silicon Forest titan, a position earned not through nepotism or luck, but through a lifetime affinity for the elegant language of technology. I wrote my first functional program at 15, sold an innovative mobile application at 22, and have been ascending the corporate lattice ever since, leaving behind a trail of patents, keynote speeches at international conferences, and stock options with a vesting schedule that promises a future of profound freedom. Marcus, however, held a different reality in his mind. He believed me to be an administrative assistant, a diligent but financially precarious organizer of calendars and conference rooms, perpetually one missed paycheck away from trouble, a woman who needed rescuing. The deception was one of omission, a sin of quiet allowance. Our meeting, 14 months prior in a coffee shop buzzing with the clatter of espresso machines, set the template. "What do you do?" he'd asked, his smile warm. "I work in tech," I'd replied, the truth, broad and unadorned. His eyes had glazed with a familiar, polite incomprehension. "Ah," he'd nodded, building his own narrative. "So you handle scheduling for the executives? Must be chaos." I'd offered a vague, non-committal murmur about supporting the team, and he had filled the vast, blank canvas of my professional life with the only colors his worldview readily provided. I never corrected him. Not once. Why? Why would a self-possessed, successful woman deliberately obscure her achievements from the man she professed to love? The answer is not found in malice, but in the legacy of the most influential person I have ever known. My grandmother, Eleanor Margaret Graham, raised me from the age of 7, following the sudden, silent departure of my parents from this world. Her existence was a testament to quiet modesty, a cozy, well-kept bungalow in an unassuming neighborhood, a reliable but aging sedan, weekly trips to the local grocer, a wardrobe favoring comfort and durability over labels. She taught me to measure worth in the depth of one's word, the warmth of a homemade meal, the integrity that persists when no one is watching. She was my anchor, my moral compass. Her death when I was 24 revealed a truth that reshaped my understanding of her and of the world. The woman who clipped coupons and mended her own sweaters died possessing a fortune worth several $1,000,000. A shrewd and visionary businesswoman in her youth, she had built a small empire from a single idea, invested with a preternatural wisdom, and chosen a life of deliberate simplicity. Her wealth was not for display. It was a tool, a security, a quiet proof of her own philosophy. She left everything to me, along with a letter I keep in my nightstand, its paper now soft from repeated handling. In her precise, looping script, she wrote, "My dearest Ella, true character is only ever revealed in the unobserved moments. It shows itself when a person believes you have nothing to offer them, when they are convinced you dwell beneath their notice. That is when the mask slips, and you see the raw material of their soul. Never confuse noise with substance, or wealth with worth." So when Marcus, with nervous excitement, invited me to dinner at his parents' palatial estate, when he hinted that this night might signify a serious step forward, when he carefully noted that his mother placed a great deal of stock in first impressions, I made a decision. I would gift the illustrious Whitmore family the ultimate test, the one my grandmother had implicitly designed. I would arrive as their expectation incarnate. Ella, the unassuming, modestly successful, perhaps even slightly desperate girlfriend. I would wear the armor of perceived mediocrity and observe with forensic attention how they treated someone they believed could offer them nothing but a drain on their resources and a blot on their social standing. Before you condemn this as manipulation, before you judge the deception, ask yourself, have you never yearned to see behind the curated facade? Have you never suspected that the welcoming smiles in certain rooms are as hollow as a painted backdrop? Have you never desired the unvarnished truth, even if its revelation carries the potential for profound pain? I needed that truth. I was not merely contemplating marriage to Marcus. I was evaluating an entire ecosystem, a dynasty with its own rules and hierarchies. And as my grandmother also imparted, families are forever. The Whitmore estate was a study in aggressive opulence, a property that didn't whisper its wealth but shouted it from manicured hilltops. The driveway unfurled like a sleek, black-tarred runway, long enough to require its own postal code. The gates were wrought iron, tortured into ornate spirals and fleur-de-lis, accented with what I suspected was actual gold leaf, a touch that crossed from impressive into the realm of the frankly vulgar. The lawn was a flawless emerald sea, each blade seemingly trimmed to a military-grade uniformity. Guiding my 12-year-old Subaru Outback, a car valued for its steadfast reliability, not its prestige, up that immaculate path, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Minimal makeup, hair secured in a no-nonsense ponytail, my grandmother's small, real gold, studs my only jewelry. I looked precisely like an interloper. The experiment was underway. Marcus greeted me at the grandiose entrance with a kiss that felt staged, a performance for an unseen audience lurking in the shadows of the portico. His eyes did their own quick assessment, flickering over my ensemble, and in that microsecond, I detected a new, unsettling emotion, a flicker of embarrassment quickly doused. He was ashamed of my presentation. Data point 1, recorded. The interior was a museum dedicated to the aspiration of old money, curated by those who had acquired their wealth too recently to understand its quiet deployment. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen explosions from every ceiling. Walls were lined with gilt-framed oil paintings of stern ancestors and pastoral scenes, though a trained eye could discern the telltale flatness of mass-produced prints. The furniture, All sharp angles and stiff, brocaded upholstery prioritized aesthetic intimidation over comfort. And there, stationed in the center of the marble foyer as if holding court, stood Patricia Whitmore. She was a masterpiece of strategic maintenance, a woman in her early 60s whose face bore the subtle, telltale signs of excellent surgical intervention. Her blonde hair was a solid, immobile helmet. Her dress was a silent scream of a designer label. Her jewels were substantial and undoubtedly real, and her smile was a feat of engineering, wide, bright, and utterly devoid of human warmth. She extended a hand as if bestowing a great favor. The handshake was limp, a mere brushing of skin against skin, a tactile dismissal. Then came the whisper about the help. I smiled, a blank, pleasant mask, and pretended deafness. The evening unfolded with the predictable rhythm of a well-rehearsed play of subtle cruelties. We were joined by Vivian, Marcus's older sister, who arrived 20 minutes late. A power play, I surmised. She was a walking advertisement for excessive consumption, draped in a dress that cost more than my first car, diamonds cascading from her ears and neck with aggressive sparkle. Her greeting to me was a single frost-laden hello, devoid of any accompanying welcome. She then immediately turned to Patricia, launching into a detailed critique of a florist's failings at a recent charity gala, a conversation designed to exclude and intimidate. Harold Whitmore, Marcus's father, was a large, weary-looking man who seemed already defeated by the relentless ambition of his wife and daughter. His handshake was an attempt at firmness that felt merely tired, but his eyes held a shrewd, observing quality. He watched me with a curiosity that set him apart from the women's immediate disdain. Then there was the wild card, Richard Hartley, an older gentleman introduced as a longtime family friend and business associate. Silver-haired and possessing a quiet, penetrating gaze, he shook my hand, and his eyes lingered on my face with a spark of recognition that puzzled me. I was certain we had never met, yet he studied me throughout the evening with a thoughtful, almost knowing expression. Dinner was served in a dining room that could comfortably seat a small parliament. The place settings were a bewildering array of cutlery. I counted 6 forks at my setting alone. Patricia noted my survey of the silverware with a thin smile. "I suppose formal dining isn't something you're accustomed to," she said, her voice syrup-sweet with condescension. "My grandmother taught me that the quality of the company always outweighs the quantity of the forks," I replied evenly. Patricia's smile tightened by a micron. Vivian snorted into her wine. The meal became an interrogation masquerading as conversation. Patricia, with surgical precision, probed my origins, a small Oregon town, my family, raised by my grandmother, my parents, deceased. She offered a sound of sympathy that resembled a blocked sink clearing. How difficult, growing up without proper guidance. "My grandmother was all the guidance I needed," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Vivian pounced. "And what did your grandmother do? For a living, I mean." "She was a businesswoman," I answered truthfully. "What kind of business?" "Small ventures, nothing too exciting." The multi-million-dollar sale of her company remained my secret. Patricia shifted focus to my present. "And you work in tech?" Marcus said. "A secretary, I assume?" "A support role," I affirmed, technically accurate. Her nod was one of profound satisfaction, a puzzle piece clicking neatly into her predetermined picture. It was then that Vivian, with the subtlety of a catapult, launched the name into the conversation. Alexandra. The air at the table seemed to freeze. She mentioned running into her last week, how wonderfully she was doing, how her family's business, a luxury automotive import company, was thriving. I watched Marcus. A ghost of something, guilt, panic, flitted across his features before vanishing. Patricia seized the narrative. Such a lovely girl, so accomplished, so suited to certain lifestyles. She turned a saccharine gaze on me. She and Marcus were together for 3 years. A shame it ended. Everyone assumed, well, The implication was a wall I was meant to crumble against. I merely smiled and said she sounded remarkable, a response that visibly discomfited Vivian. Emboldened, Patricia drove the point home. I do hope you won't feel too out of place in our world, dear, given your more modest background. I asked her to clarify what she meant by modest. Her smile gained teeth. Some people are born into certain advantages. Others lead ordinary lives. There's no shame in being common. Common. The word hung in the perfumed air. The data was conclusive. The hypothesis was proving correct. But a new variable was emerging. Marcus's passivity. His weak protest, "Mother doesn't mean anything," was less a defense of me and more a plea for domestic peace. The man I thought I loved was receding, revealing a stranger shaped by filial fear and social ambition. Harold attempted a diversion, asking about my hobbies. Reading, hiking, cooking simple meals, I listed. Vivian's laugh was a short, sharp bark. How quaint. It was Richard Hartley who broke his silence, his voice a calm, low rumble. I've always valued simple pleasures. My grandmother lived modestly and was the happiest person I knew. He then fixed his keen eyes on me. What was your grandmother's name? Margaret Graham, I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He said nothing more, but his thoughtful nod felt significant. Seeking a moment's respite, I excused myself to find a bathroom. Wandering the cold, art-lined hallway, I overheard voices from a partially open door. Patricia and Vivian, their tones sharp and urgent. Every ethical instinct said to walk on, but my grandmother's test demanded the full truth. I paused, concealed in shadow. Needs to be dealt with quickly, Patricia hissed. He cannot be allowed to ruin everything with this infatuation. The timing is catastrophic, Vivian replied. The Castellano merger is imperative. Marcus must be with Alexandra for it to happen. The dealerships won't survive the next year without their capital and distribution access. My blood chilled. This was beyond snobbery. This was a financial Hail Mary. Marcus assured me he was keeping Alexandra interested as a contingency, Patricia said. A contingency, while he was planning a life with me. Vivian's voice was scornful. He's a fool. He's actually growing attached to this little secretary. She was supposed to be a placeholder until the Alexandra situation was finalized. A placeholder. The word was a scalpel, clean and precise. Patricia's plan unfolded in cold, clinical detail. They would force a public engagement tonight, locking Marcus to me. Then later, once Alexandra was secured, they would unearth or invent a terrible secret about me to justify breaking it off. What secret? Vivian asked. We'll find one, or create one, if necessary. Then, the final devastating assessment from Vivian. At least the girl is too stupid to suspect anything. Naive. Probably just grateful someone like Marcus noticed her. I stepped back from the door, my hands steady but my mind racing with a cold, clarifying fury. They viewed me as a simple obstacle, malleable and disposable. Their arrogance was their fatal flaw. I returned to the gathering, my smile intact. The final phase of the experiment crystallizing in my mind. Not just observation, but response. Back in the sitting room, a staged scene awaited. Under Patricia's triumphant gaze, Marcus, sweating slightly, descended to one knee and produced a large, flashy ring with a cloudy diamond in poor setting, a perfect metaphor for their entire scheme. He asked me to marry him. I looked at his pleading face, at Patricia's performative joy, at the trap so gleefully laid. Saying no would grant me a clean escape. Saying yes would grant me something far more powerful, the element of surprise and the opportunity to dismantle their world from within its own gilded walls. I said yes. The false celebrations that followed were a nauseating pantomime. Throughout it all, Richard Hartley's knowing gaze followed me. When Marcus walked me to my car at the night's end, offering hollow assurances that his family would come around. I knew the man I had loved was a fiction. The real Marcus was a co-conspirator in my humiliation. In the clear light of the next day, I began my counteroffensive. My profession is built on systems analysis, on identifying vulnerabilities and architecting solutions. I applied this methodology to the Whitmore empire. My research confirmed their financial precipice, over-leveraged, with a key franchise agreement dangling by a thread. But I discovered more. Vivian had been systematically embezzling from the company for years, siphoning 6 figures to fund her extravagant lifestyle. I reached out to my grandmother's network, respected names in business who remembered the Graham legacy with esteem. Through them, I connected with Richard Hartley in secret. He confirmed his own history with the Whitmores, a deal soured by their ethical shortcuts years prior. He was a willing ally, possessing his own dossier of their dubious practices. Our motivations aligned not in vengeance, but in a desire for accountability. Your grandmother would be proud, he told me, and I knew I was on the right path. For the next 3 weeks, I played my role flawlessly, the dutiful, oblivious fiancé. I endured the dinners, the passive aggression, the constant, grating presence of Alexandra's ghost. I watched Marcus grow increasingly guarded with his phone. One evening, under the pretense of working late, I followed him. I witnessed him and Alexandra at an intimate corner table, holding hands, their affection unmistakable. I documented it. The final piece of evidence was secured. The night before the grand engagement party, I gave Marcus one last chance at redemption. In his apartment, amidst the party planning, I asked if there was anything he needed to tell me. He looked into my eyes, the eyes of the woman he believed to be a naive secretary, and swore there was nothing. He said I was everything he wanted. When I mentioned Alexandra, he paled, called her just an old friend, and lied with seamless conviction. The experiment was over. The results were definitive. The engagement party was Patricia's masterpiece, a dazzling display of wealth and influence on the Whitmore lawn. I arrived in my Subaru to the valet's confusion, but I was no longer the woman they expected. I wore a custom emerald gown from a legendary designer, my grandmother's exquisite diamond pendant, a watch of understated rarity. I was no longer Ella the placeholder. I was Ella Graham, unveiled. The ripple of confusion began immediately. Harold's welcome stalled in his throat. Guests whispered, checking phones, recognizing the dissonance between the Whitmore's description and the woman before them. When I reached Patricia, her frozen smile shattered into a mask of panic and fury. "Where did you get those things?" she demanded, her voice a strained whisper. "I've been saving them for a special occasion," I replied mildly. The plan unfolded with precision. Richard was present, as was the manufacturing executive whose franchise agreement was critical. The air grew thick with anticipation. After Harold and Patricia's speeches, Patricia's laden with not-so-subtle hints about business mergers, I was called to the stage. The microphone felt heavy with destiny. I began by thanking Patricia for her hospitality, then calmly dismantled their world. I recounted the first dinner, the insults, the conversation I'd overheard, the plan to use me as a placeholder, the desperate Castellano merger, the financial ruin they were hiding. I displayed the photo of Marcus and Alexandra on my phone. I announced Vivian's embezzlement. Richard stepped forward, handing a folder of proof to the stunned manufacturer's representative. The tent was utterly silent, a vacuum of shock. Patricia spluttered about defamation. Vivian shrieked denials. Harold looked shattered. Finally, I removed the cheap, flawed engagement ring. "I will not be marrying Marcus Whitmore," I declared, my voice ringing in the silence. The only reason I accepted was to see how deep the deception went. I handed the ring back to a broken Marcus, who stammered pathetic justifications about business arrangements and mother's plans. "That is precisely the problem," I said. "You have no spine of your own." I told the assembled crowd who I truly was, a successful software architect, a granddaughter of a remarkable businesswoman, a woman who lived by choice, not necessity. I explained my grandmother's test and how the Whitmores had failed it spectacularly. You judge worth by bank statements, I concluded. That is a poverty no amount of money can cure. I set down the microphone and walked out through the parted crowd, leaving behind a waking nightmare of chaos, Patricia's desperate damage control, the executive's urgent calls, Vivian's crumbling marriage, Harold's defeat. Richard met me by the fountain. "It's done," he said. The franchise would be terminated. Justice, long delayed, had arrived. I drove home through the quiet night, the weight of the performance lifted, replaced by a profound and settled peace. 1 week later, a news alert confirmed the collapse. Whitmore Automotive facing closure after franchise termination. The article detailed the financial irregularities, the embezzlement investigation, the end of an era. My name was absent, as I wished. Their downfall was the fruit of their own actions. When a pleading text from Marcus arrived, asking for explanation, for another chance, I deleted it. Some bridges are meant to be burned, the view from the far shore clearer without them. Now, in my modest apartment, I touch my grandmother's pendant. The lesson is etched not in memory, but in bone. Worth is not a currency traded on any market. It is the quiet integrity that guides you when the world isn't watching, the courage to demand truth, and the strength to walk away from a gilded cage, no matter how sparkling its bars. The Whitmores mistook my simplicity for stupidity, my quietness for weakness. In doing so, they gave me the greatest advantage of all. They never saw me coming, and I finally saw them, and myself, with perfect, unclouded clarity.